Hello Internet, and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming, and today I want to talk to you about Session 0. First, what is a Session 0? A Session 0 is when you and your players get together and decide on some rules and expectations about the game that you're about to start playing. It's called Session 0 because it's before Session 1, before the game actually starts. Although, some people may do little demos or character introductions and things like that, depending on your group. It's not like nothing related to the game will happen, but it's much more about the metagame and the table where the game is going to be taking place. The point of the Session 0 is to set expectations for the game so that everyone knows what they're getting into. Everyone has a clear idea of what's expected from them, and these are all social contracts. And it's a very important part of playing tabletop RPGs is the social contract part, because for it to work, you are relying on the people around you, both to behave in a way that is going to vary. What behaving is going to vary table by table. You might have some pretty rambunctious tables that can get a little bawdry, and you might have tables that are much more, straight-laced, a little more composed. And none of that is right or wrong. It's your table. It's you and your players. Whatever you're agreeing to do is what you should do. And as long as everyone's having a good time and no one's being hurt, then there's no reason for you to change, what you're doing. But this helps you and your players decide up front how you're going to conduct yourselves and how what to expect from the game. So first things first, you're going to want to talk about the setting. As soon as you tell people that you're going to start playing a game, everyone's going to already be working on their characters. But by having a Session 0 and telling people not to get, too tied to anything until after the Session 0, you get to discuss, as a GM, what your plans are, your goals, how you're seeing the campaign. But it's not one-sided. None of this is one-sided. This is a group effort, just like the game is. So, you want to leave yourself open and say, hey, I was expecting or thinking about doing things this way. Is that cool with everybody? Maybe you're planning a lower than average magic campaign. Not that there's no wizards, but maybe it's, there's not a lot of big schools for wizardry. It's a rare secret thing. And that's something that you and your players should talk about. And that's both big picture, overarching, like it's a low magic world, but also talk a little bit about the setting itself, where you expect the players to begin the game, that type of environment, what they can expect, what they should not expect. Are you going to start them in a completely cut off desert location and, some of your party was thinking they were going to be pirates and now all of a sudden we've got an issue, right? It could be worked around. You could find a way for those pirates to be stranded in the desert. It's not impossible. But if they were counting on not just being pirates, but getting to do piratey things, then you run into an issue of those expectations meeting the reality of the table. And that's the kind of thing that you want to get hashed out. You don't want to be sitting there, Session 1, getting ready to roll dice, and you're looking around the table as you describe the setting, and two of your players are looking at you confused because they're thinking, well, I was expecting to, be in some sort of marshlands, and here we are in a techno city. And my character's built for marshlands. We're in a techno city. It might have been cool to know that up front. And this isn't a question of whether you can adapt to that or not, but it's a question of, what was that player's expectation when they made that character versus, what's actually going to be happening. So that's why you want them to wait until after that Session 0 so that everyone can have a clear idea of what is and isn't on the table, whether you're saying that certain ancestries don't exist in this game world or that certain classes don't exist in this game world, whatever the case may be. It's also a good place to set up any house rules that you have, like maybe you use some alternative rules from the Game Mastery Guide for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, for example. Or maybe you have a couple of house rules. Maybe you always do dex to damage, or even if the players aren't thieves kind of thing. So just things like that about what players can expect from the actual game itself. Next, you want to start talking about the story. That is going to be what kind of themes and concepts are you going to be exploring, if any. You can definitely play something a lot more loose, but if you have a goal in mind for this campaign, not just go kill X Lich or whatever it may be, but a goal as in what are we sort of exploring, what are we thinking about, then now's the time to bring that up. Is your game going to be a light, fun game about friendship and journeying together and having adventures? Great. Is it going to be something a little darker about intrigue and the secrets that people keep from each other? That's a big difference, and you want to talk about that. And that doesn't mean that you need to hash out exactly what kind of game you're going to have. If you definitely all agree that you want to have a really serious, dramatic game, great. If you all agree that you want to have a silly, don't take anything too seriously, sort of comedic game, also great. Most games are going to fall somewhere in between and may even, flex and change throughout, but you can at least sort of get a bearing, find a rudder on which direction you're going to lean. Next, we're going to get into some of the where game meets metagame, and we're going to talk about some things that you will or won't allow. Is player versus player, that's PvP, is that going to be okay? That is not necessarily can a player attack and try to kill another player, but it can be much less severe than that. It can be, well, you can't try to steal from this player. You can't just be antagonistic in any way towards your players. You can even say you should never be rolling a check against another player unless there's a charm effect or something like that happening. And that's all okay, and that's something you should talk about wherever you want to land on those. Some players may totally be open to it. As a GM, you may have certain qualms with allowing PvP at all, but, and that's what you should discuss, and everybody should figure out where they land on it and figure out where the group is going to land on it. Because regardless of where you are, what side you're on during the discussion phase, once you've decided where the game is going to be, you all need to be committed to saying, yes, okay, this is what we landed on. Maybe I would have preferred this thing over here or a little more of, blah, blah, but we landed on this and we're all going to do this. Another thing to think about is metagaming. Some people do not like metagaming at all. Some people almost expect metagame. Some very less RP, more grindy, meat grinder type of games are going to sort of expect your players to know how to kill certain things or else they might die. And that's, neither one is wrong. None of this is going to be right or wrong, really, but it's all about what do you want your table. Me personally, I don't mind metagaming as long as it can be presented in game. I don't want to hear someone say, hey, this thing's got 42 AC. I want somebody to say, okay, this thing's rough, and that's only if you know it. If you don't already know it, please don't go look it up. That's weird. Don't do that. But, if you already have an idea of a creature, maybe you fought it in a previous campaign, maybe you ran one in a previous campaign, and you just really feel like letting it out. Ideally, you'd be rolling recall knowledge checks to see if your character knows that as well. But again, that's okay at my table if a little metagaming happens because, it's a game. But every table is going to be different, and every GM is going to have, different red flags that they might see. So, check ahead. What about the overall plot? How is it going to be presented? Is it going to be a railroad type of a game where everything's sort of set and the players are going to go through motions, almost like an adventure path where there's a certain amount of sign-on that everybody's going to say yes and pretty much no matter what comes out of the GM's face, like, oh, that's what we're doing? I guess that's what we're doing. We're all going to go and do the thing, right? And that's fine. You might just do something a little more like guardrails, I call it, where, you're going to sort of funnel the players a certain direction. How exactly they get there is okay. They may bounce back and forth. They may take the straight path, but either way, there's a boundary that you and they are not expected to go past. Or you might go full sandbox where everything is wide open and it's all about the player agency and what they decide to do, and see where that takes you. Again, none of these are right or wrong. It's just about what works for the story you want to tell and what works at that table. Another thing to think about is how much backstory do you want? Some players, it's like pulling teeth just to get anything out of them, and that's okay. Other players, as soon as you say, hey, give me a character concept by Friday, so I can, see what we need to work in, and then next thing you know, Friday night, 2 a.m., you get an email with 15 pages of backstory, and, and you've got to peruse that and see what's going on. And again, both are fine. But it's important to set what you as a GM are expecting, because a player who spends 15 pages telling you about their backstory is going to expect some of that to come up, most likely. So if that's the sort of thing that, if you want to tell a very linear, straightforward story and somebody's bringing up all these things they want you to work in, that's the sort of thing in a session 0 you might want to let them know, hey, don't expect that sort of thing. So tell them how much backstory you want, tell them how much they can expect you to intertwine that backstory into the story, if at all. Again, whatever you as the GM had planned. And as with anything in a session 0, just because you hadn't planned it as a GM, if a lot of your players are saying, hey, we think that's fun, that's something you might want to adjust. Another big thing, and a lot of people may find this a strange thing to cover in a session 0, but I like to do this. I like to ask my players, how are you going to fit into this group? You don't know this group much, but besides what we're all talking about, just these ballparks of characters. And I ask that question, not expecting an answer necessarily right away, but so that the players, when they're making their characters, are thinking about that. That's going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to hammer home to them that they will need to be working together. But it's also going to make them, when they're making other choices about their characters, they're going to think about it in terms of, how do I make this a cohesive part of this group? And versus, I'm making an edgelord, and if a character is just making a character they think is really cool, which will happen a lot, they'll think of a TV show or a movie and a character that they really like from that, failing to realize that character is a main character, a primary protagonist, and is not part of a group. So when that character is really short and rude to people, and we're invested in that character, we're like, that's great. But when they're supposed to be part of a team and they're really short and rude with people, then all of a sudden that's a problem. So, by reminding them from the get-go, from Jump Street, hey, this is a group game, you need to make a character that can work well in that group. And that does not mean that you can't be an edgy sort of edgelord type character. You can definitely do that in terms of what you present RP wise. But you need to, not have the core of your character be being rude to other players' characters. No one likes that. No one's going to invite that character on their adventure. You also need to allow room for that player to put their guard down or, make whatever exception they need to make. It shouldn't be a group of people sitting around, how do we convince this player? You should have already convinced your character. And then you do that on your own, and then you're going to go forth and play. Because it's not your party's responsibility to convince you to go on an adventure with them as a player. And we'll do a whole other video on not being a problem player. We touched on it before. But it is just, it's an important point. You're part of the session 0. You should be, when you're designing your character, you should be thinking about, how is this character going to work in a group? And hey, if your session 0 involved everyone agreeing we all want to be, court spies and can't trust each other and only working together as far as whatever, great. You've all agreed to it. Play that game. You'll have a blast. But if you haven't agreed to it, don't do it. While we're on the subject of ruining the game with, terrible characters who don't work in a group, let's talk about more ways that you can ruin the game, or more importantly, how you can avoid that. So we're going to talk about safety tools. It's important to make sure everyone at the table feels safe and can enjoy themselves. There are all sorts of tools to promote this. I'm going to refer to the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook, I believe page 480. There are some rules that you can use, the little safety tools they're called, and they can allow you and your players to set up some guidelines and things at the table about the type of content that will or will not be in the game. The 2 tools for responsible play as presented are Lines and Veils, which was developed by Ron Edwards. This allows players and GMs to determine things that should never be part of the game, and things that that can be part of the game but should be glossed over. So the examples they gave are, as a line, might be, we don't do torture. There's no torture at this table. Even our bad guys aren't going to do it. We're definitely not going to do it. We don't want that. So the GM would not do that. The players would not, no matter how much they need information from this goon, they would not do that either. Whoever it is, they have agreed as a table, everyone has agreed, we're not going to do this or see this. And then the things that can be represented in game, just not elaborated on, don't go into detail, are the veils. So you have the lines that you do not cross, and then you have the veils. And that's something where, it's like drawing a curtain, right? So maybe a romantic encounter comes up. The party has agreed that it's okay for them to have romantic involvement, but anytime it gets steamy, we pull a veil and we give those characters their privacy. We don't get into the specifics of what's going on. And again, maybe you're having the kind of game where that's what everybody wants to do. That's totally fine, but it's definitely not something that you should assume people want, and you should talk about it. And as always with these veils and lines, once someone has pointed to one, it can't become less than that. So if someone says that's a veil for me, it cannot be less than a veil. Like, no matter, even if 4 people are okay with it, if one person's going to be bothered with it, you've got to all agree, okay, well, we will not do this because it makes that person uncomfortable. And that's good. That's okay. That's kind of the point of all this, right? Is that there's not going to be questions. There's not going to be arguing and debating like, well, what about this? The only questions you should be asking is to clarify exactly where that line is, where that veil is, beforehand, so that you know exactly when to draw that curtain or exactly when, to turn back in whatever you're planning to do. And this is important because if somebody says, I'm uncomfortable with this, that can take a lot of effort on their part. So if anybody pushes back a little bit, they may retract that statement, even if they don't mean it. They may still feel that way, but maybe they really just want to play the game. And that means, they'll go along to get along sort of thing. But the whole time they're playing, there's that little piece of them. Every time it comes up, that just makes it worse for them. So, it's not something that you should try to fight people on or try to convince them on. If somebody says something is a line or a veil, that's it. Many of these things will be agreed upon in session 0, but some more may come up during play that people either hadn't anticipated or just thought, wouldn't come up as much, or maybe somebody's worldview has shifted in the meantime due to some event or another, and something that they thought they might be comfortable with before, they no longer feel comfortable with. So be okay and be prepared to go back and re-examine those throughout play. The second tool presented in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook is the X card. This was developed by John Stavropoulos, and it involves drawing an X on a card and putting it on the table, ideally somewhere where everyone can touch or at least point to, see it clearly. And the idea is that if something happens in the game and someone is made uncomfortable or doesn't want to do that, they can reject whatever's happening by simply pointing to the card silently. No explanation is required, no nothing. And whoever is speaking, whoever had the talking stick at the time, is going to backtrack, just rewind a little bit, and then start again, omitting whatever the offensive content was. And again, as before, if you need to clarify, if you want to specify to make sure that you're cutting out the right thing, like, was it this or was it this, then, feel free to do that. But do not question any further. No whys, no really, no, nothing like that. Like, just a big part of this is just assume that people are genuine when they tell you something makes them uncomfortable, and allow them on their own time through therapy or whatever sort of mental health things they may do to work that out. The game is not the place to force someone to work something out. So if someone's uncomfortable, just let them do that. That's okay. Everyone just do what needs to be done to make sure that everyone can enjoy that game. So at most, how far back should I go? The extent of the questions you're going to ask. Now, as a GM, if somebody does use the X card, you may want to, after the game, talk to them privately and say, hey, I just want to make sure that I know where exactly that was. Do we need to adjust the expectations for the game? Do we need to create a new line or veil? Or make any other sort of revision to the social contract of our table? And again, the driving force here is that if somebody wants to play, they shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable to get to play. Now, let's move on from that to something that can be just as big of a deal, though, and that is logistics. So the big thing is, how often can everyone meet? I am finding as I grow ever older that it becomes harder and harder for adults to schedule their time and be in control of their time. So, think about how long of a campaign are we expecting to play? How often are we going to meet for that campaign? How long is each session going to be? Are we going to meet regularly, a certain day so that people can clear their schedule and keep it clear? Or are we going to sort of play it by ear, week to week and see what day works best for everybody? These are the sort of things you want to hash out. As always, you will want to be ready to revise that. People's lives can and will suddenly change without, the decency of giving warning to anyone. So be ready to change, dates, times, whatever as need be. Be ready, unfortunately, sometimes to miss a week or two or a month here and there, as real world needs arise. And occasionally games may completely die. But, the idea is that you set these expectations and it allows people to create those opportunities to play, to say, okay, well, I always keep my Sunday evenings clear for the game. And again, it won't be perfect, but you can at least set those guidelines and increase the chances of it being able to continue. Along those lines, where will you play? Again, this could change session to session. Maybe you rotate people's houses. Maybe one person always hosts. Maybe you go to a local brick and mortar game store that has tables set aside that you can, reserve ahead of time. That's always fun if you can focus around the noise. Sometimes it's a lot of fun to be in that sort of group environment. Are food and drink going to be allowed at the game? Or is it something where, eat before you come sort of thing? If there are going to be drinks, what kind of drinks? Alcoholic drinks, are those okay? Is there a certain amount of them okay? Or, maybe, yes, it's fine as long as you don't go too far sort of thing. You want to decide all that. If some people just don't want any of that, then again, you want to say, okay, well, we're not going to do that. If you are going to have food and drinks, though, decide, are we going to have everybody bring a little something? Are we going to have, you're the chip person, you're the drink person, or are you going to, rotate each week? Like, I'll get the pizza this week, you get the tacos next week, whatever it may be. Just decide that, hammer it out, try to at least get some guidelines. As always, things may change, but with that sort of thing, you just want some expectations, like all this. Finally, now that we've set all of our social contracts and our expectations, both in-game and just around the table for what people can expect and the type of behavior that we're all expecting from each other, now you want to have the uncomfortable talk about how are we going to enforce these guidelines. Hopefully, minimal confrontation is required. You're all sitting here, you all seemingly like each other enough to sit down at a table and play. You all want to play. You all, are, wanting to be part of this team group environment. So hopefully not a whole lot of, pushing and prodding is going to be required. But it may be sometimes. And so that's why it's important up front, even if you don't anticipate it really being a problem, to still say, hey, listen, these are the terms that we're all agreeing to. And, here is what's going to happen if somebody does not engage with these expectations. What that means can vary group to group, but you should not be afraid. Nobody should be afraid to say, hey, listen, if somebody cannot meet these guidelines, these behavioral requirements, then they're not going to be invited to keep playing the game. Because, alienating 3 people, because that's what someone's idea of fun is, even though everyone talked about it beforehand and agreed that was not anyone else's idea of fun, is not going to be a happy table. And it's better to continue on with 3 players and an empty seat than it is to continue with a problem player, because 1 empty seat is a lot better than 1, 2, 3 empty seats as the people get sick of that behavior and stop coming. The bottom line is people should not have to endure terrible behavior just to enjoy a game. So, if you have those problems, you need to be upfront from the get-go and say, listen, if we see this kind of stuff, and this is to everybody, if we see this kind of stuff, whoever is doing it, we're going to talk to you a couple of times, ask you to stop, point out where the problem behavior is, give you the benefit of the doubt a time or two. But after that, or, immediately, if it's a severe enough situation, and I have seen them, we will step in and we will say, hey, you can't be a part of this anymore. Because a bad game is worse than no game for sure. But there's no reason to have no game when you could just get rid of 1 bad player. So, by setting those expectations early, you have something to point to when you see that bad behavior from someone, and they'll know it's not personal. You can say, hey, listen, we all agreed we weren't going to do this, and you're doing this, so if you continue, we're not going to let you play because, again, we all agreed to this. And that's a lot better than, them just saying, well, this is coming out of nowhere. I didn't know this wasn't going to be okay. And now, now they're upset. They feel it's a personal attack versus something that you can, again, point to and say, we all said this wasn't okay. It can be a little heavy. Hopefully not. These rules, a lot of them, the things that I talked about here are there for extreme cases. But you shouldn't, that doesn't mean that you should just ignore them and say, oh, well, my table is not an extreme table. I know my players, they're not going to be these types of people. You shouldn't assume that, and you should know going in. I mean, things like veils and lines, there's nothing extreme about that, right? Now, there are somebody who's repeatedly crossing established veils and lines, that's extreme. But just having them is not extreme. And your players who you've been playing with for years may have some veils and lines that they've just never felt comfortable bringing up, but they would enjoy the game a lot more if they weren't there. And a lot of times it's going to be the sort of thing that, once you realize that it's a problem, you're going to take it out, and your game's not going to have any less depth, any less enjoyment for anyone else because of this one missing piece. And instead, you're going to have another player at your table who's going to be more engaged, more comfortable, more happy, and more excited to come back each week. And that's the whole point. Get everybody excited to come back and sit in those chairs and play the game. And these are all just tools to figure out what everybody wants, figure out how to prevent things that nobody wants, and then figure out how to, enforce them and move forward and encourage the right kind of play and discourage the bad kind of play. Hopefully you will use session zeros, even if you don't already. If you do, great, wonderful. Be sure down in the comments to let us know of any other tools that you like to use. That way people can see them. If there are links, if it's a big in-depth tool, don't try to describe it in the comments, but maybe provide a link or some directions so that people can find them online. Things that you and your players have found works really well for these sorts of things. It's a group effort, and the whole point is for everyone to have fun. And if you know a way to help people have fun, definitely let us know. Also, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed, it really helps the channel out, so please do that. And we do have a Discord where we hang out. We talk Pathfinder 2e mostly, but all sorts of other things, video games, other tabletop RPGs, miniatures and crafting and things like that. So come hang out over there. Everybody's pretty friendly. We try to make sure it's as inclusive and good vibes as possible. So we hope to see you there. Thanks so much for watching. Welcome to the Collective, and we'll see you next time.